"Do whatever you want, cowboy," said the tied Apache woman, but what happened next surprised everyone. The sun was beginning to sink low in the sky, casting long, orange shadows across the dry desert landscape. The air was hot and dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint dust of the trail. A lone cowboy rode slowly along a narrow path, his hat pulled low over his eyes, and the reins of his horse held loosely in one hand. He was a man used to traveling alone, and yet there was an unshakable alertness in his movements, a sense that he was always ready for whatever might come around the next bend. This cowboy had spent years on the open range, working with cattle, mending fences, and protecting his own from trouble. But life in the desert had taught him that danger often came when least expected, and that courage alone was never enough. It had to be paired with quick thinking, patience, and respect for the land and the people who lived on it. As he rounded a sharp curve in the rocky trail, he noticed something unusual ahead. At first, it seemed like just another pile of rocks or a shadow, but then he realized that it was a figure, small and tense, tied roughly to a wooden post near a cluster of scrubby trees. The cowboy slowed his horse to a cautious stop, keeping a distance but watching intently. The figure was a woman, her clothing dusty and torn, her hair loose and messy from the struggle she had clearly endured. She was tied at the wrists and ankles, and her eyes were sharp, alert, and unafraid. The sight made his heart beat faster, not with fear but with a fierce determination. He had seen many people in trouble during his years on the range, but something about this scene felt different. It wasn't just a woman in danger. It was a situation charged with tension, one that could spiral out of control at any moment. The cowboy studied the surroundings carefully. There were no men visible yet, but he knew that whoever had done this would not be far. The desert had a way of hiding things until it was too late, and he intended not to be caught unprepared. He spoke softly, his voice carrying over the still air. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman's eyes met his, and for a moment there was silence. Then, to his surprise, she said, her voice calm but commanding, "Do whatever you want, cowboy." The cowboy blinked, caught off guard. It was not a plea for help, not a cry of fear, but a statement, an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. Her tone was not one of weakness. It carried a quiet confidence that made him respect her immediately. She was not asking him to save her because she was helpless. She was testing him, gauging whether he would act with the right judgment. He dismounted carefully, letting the reins slide over his horse's neck, keeping his body relaxed but ready. He knew that any sudden movement could escalate the situation, especially if the men responsible for tying her were nearby. He needed to assess everything, the ground, the trees, any rocks or natural cover, and he did it quickly, methodically. The woman watched him closely, her posture straight even though she was bound. There was an intensity in her eyes that spoke of survival, intelligence, and an unspoken courage that most people never encountered. The cowboy realized that this woman was not a victim in the traditional sense. She had endured a struggle and had maintained her composure throughout, and now she was relying on him not just to act, but to act wisely. A soft sound in the distance caught his attention, a faint rustle of feet over sand and rock. His instincts went on high alert. Whoever had tied the woman up was likely not far off, observing, waiting to see what would happen. The cowboy crouched slightly, using the terrain to his advantage, moving slowly toward the woman, always keeping his eyes on the area around them. As he got closer, he noticed small details. The rough knots binding her wrists, the tension in the ropes, and the way the wooden post had been driven into the ground at an awkward angle. It was clear that whoever had done this was strong, but not necessarily clever. The cowboy nodded to himself. This meant there was an opening if he could act carefully and with precision. The woman, sensing his approach, shifted slightly. "Hurry if you plan to help," she said. There was no fear in her voice, only the urgency of someone who had been waiting, silently, for the right moment. The cowboy could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. One wrong move could endanger both of them. But he also felt a deep resolve building within him. He was not a man who backed down from a challenge, especially when someone's life hung in the balance. He knelt down near her, examining the knots carefully. They were tight but not impossible to untie. He had faced similar situations before. Restraint and patience were key. He worked quietly, his hands moving with skill and efficiency, loosening the ropes just enough to give her mobility without making a sound that could alert anyone nearby. The woman's gaze never wavered from his face. "Careful," she whispered. "They're probably watching." He nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Every movement had to be deliberate. He worked with a calm focus, the desert wind brushing against their faces, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. Time seemed both slow and urgent, each second carrying the potential for danger or freedom. Finally, the ropes around her wrists gave way enough for her to free one hand. She flexed her fingers, testing her strength, then nodded to him in silent acknowledgement. They still had a distance to go before she was fully free, but the first step had been taken. The cowboy's respect for her grew with every passing moment. She was not simply someone he was saving. She was an equal partner in this delicate, tense dance between caution and action. Suddenly, a shadow moved among the distant rocks, a hint that the men responsible for this were nearby. The cowboy froze, his body taut with alertness. He whispered to the woman, "Stay low, we'll move carefully." The woman nodded. She did not panic. Instead, she adjusted her posture, preparing to follow his lead. There was a shared understanding between them now, an unspoken bond forged in the heat of danger. It was clear that they would need each other's wits and courage to navigate what came next. The cowboy signaled to her silently, indicating a path through the rocky terrain that offered cover. Step by step, they moved, each movement measured, each glance scanning the surrounding area for threats. The sun was now a fiery orange ball on the horizon, and the desert stretched out like a vast, open stage for the drama unfolding upon it. Even as they moved, the tension in the air was palpable. They could sense eyes watching them, waiting for a mistake. The woman, though tied and vulnerable just moments ago, now exuded a quiet confidence that bolstered the cowboy's own resolve. Together, they were no longer simply rescuer and victim. They were a team facing a dangerous, unpredictable situation. By the time they reached a small cluster of trees that offered better cover, the cowboy took a moment to catch his breath. He glanced at the woman, who met his eyes with a steady, calm expression. "You've been through a lot," he said quietly, "but you've got strength." "I can see it." She allowed a faint smile, the first sign of relaxation in her tense posture. "Strength," she said softly, "is what keeps you alive out here, and sometimes it's knowing who you can trust." The cowboy nodded. That was the truth he had learned over years in the desert. Trust was rare, but when it was earned, it became a powerful force. And now, in this moment, he realized that trust had been placed in him, and he intended not to let it down. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, the cowboy and the woman paused, hidden among the trees, preparing for the next move. The night was coming fast, and with it, new challenges and new dangers. But for the first time in hours, there was a spark of hope, a chance that they could overcome the immediate threat and emerge unscathed. The story of that evening would become one that the local community talked about for weeks, not because of violence or fear, but because of courage, intelligence, and the unexpected ways two people could work together to turn a dangerous situation into a moment of triumph. In the desert, under the fading sun, a cowboy and a woman faced the unknown, and in doing so, they set in motion a chain of events that would surprise everyone who witnessed it. The desert night had fallen, but the air was still warm, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. The cowboy and the Apache woman crouched low behind a cluster of rocks and scrubby trees, hidden from view, but acutely aware that the men who had tied her up were still somewhere nearby. The tension between them was thick, like the quiet before a storm, and every rustle of sand or crack of a twig made them flinch. The woman adjusted her posture, her eyes scanning the dark horizon with sharp precision. "They're out there," she whispered, "watching, waiting. They'll come closer if they think we're stuck." The cowboy nodded, keeping his voice low and calm. "We'll have to move carefully. One wrong step and they could spot us." He glanced at her, noticing how her wrists were now partially free. She had regained some movement, but she was still vulnerable. Her legs were still bound, and she would need help to get fully away from the post. Despite that, she moved with a quiet confidence, her breathing steady, her mind clearly thinking faster than most could under such pressure. "Can you crawl a little forward?" he asked, pointing to a shadowed area behind a larger boulder that could hide them completely. "I can," she replied, "but you go first. You're taller, you can see better." He shifted carefully, keeping low, moving slowly over the uneven desert ground. Each step was calculated. Every rock, every shadow was considered. The men could be anywhere, waiting to pounce, and the cowboy knew that rushing could lead to disaster. Behind him, the woman followed, dragging her legs carefully, using the strength she still had to inch forward without making a sound. The desert was silent except for the occasional night bird or the distant cry of a coyote. But the silence was deceptive. Danger was never far in a place like this, and the cowboy could feel it pressing against his senses. He had learned long ago that in situations like this, it wasn't brute strength that mattered most. It was patience, awareness, and the ability to read the intentions of those around you. After several tense minutes, they reached the boulder, and the cowboy signaled her to stop. He crouched behind the stone, peeking over to scan the area. In the faint moonlight, he could just make out the shadows of 3 men moving slowly along the ridge in the distance. They were talking quietly, probably assuming that their captive woman had no hope of escape. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He knew these men were dangerous, not just because of their strength, but because of their arrogance. They believed that fear could control people. They had underestimated the woman they had tied up, and they had not accounted for him. He whispered to her, "They're over there, you see them?" She nodded. "I see them. I knew they wouldn't leave me alone for long, but I also knew someone might come, someone who would do the right thing." There was a brief pause, and then she added, almost as if testing him, "You're going to get me out of this, aren't you?" The cowboy looked at her and smiled faintly, not with arrogance, but with the calm assurance of a man who had faced danger many times before. "I'll do more than that," he said. "We're getting out of this together." It wasn't just a promise, it was a plan, and the first step of that plan required distraction. The cowboy scanned the terrain, looking for anything he could use. A loose branch, a pile of rocks, anything to make noise in the opposite direction of where they wanted to move. He picked up a rock and tossed it carefully toward a distant cluster of cactus. The rock hit a larger stone, making a soft clatter. Immediately, 2 of the men turned their heads, scanning the direction of the noise. The cowboy and the woman used that moment to inch further along the shadowed path, moving closer to the next cover. The woman's breathing was steady, but he could feel her tension. "You're doing well," he whispered. "Almost there." Minutes passed like hours as they crept forward, every step a challenge. The woman's hands, though freed from the ropes, were scratched and raw, but she didn't complain. She focused entirely on moving without being seen. The cowboy noticed the determination in her eyes and admired her resilience. This was no ordinary captive. She was strong, smart, and courageous. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the night. "Hey, over there!" The cowboy froze. One of the men had noticed movement, or at least suspected it. The woman tensed, ready to react, but he put a calming hand on her shoulder. "Stay calm," he said softly. "Don't make a sound." The men's footsteps grew louder as they approached. The cowboy realized they had to act quickly or risk being discovered. He glanced around and saw a small depression in the ground, just large enough for both of them to hide completely. He gestured for her to follow. Together they slid into the hollow, pressing themselves low against the earth. The men passed by, muttering to one another, clearly searching for signs of escape. The cowboy's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm, controlling his breathing, listening to every sound around them. When the men finally moved out of sight, he let out a soft sigh of relief. "That was close," he said. The woman nodded, her eyes still sharp. "They'll be back. We need to move fast while they're distracted." The cowboy agreed. They crawled slowly toward a nearby ravine, using the rocks and shadows as cover. Every move was careful, calculated, and deliberate. He kept scanning the desert for any hint of danger, while the woman followed, matching his pace without hesitation. As they approached the ravine, the woman stopped and whispered, "There's something you need to know. They're not just bullies. They've been causing trouble in this area for a long time. People are scared of them." The cowboy nodded. "I understand, but that doesn't mean we can't get you out safely." She looked at him with gratitude and something else, respect. In a dangerous world, respect was earned by action, not words. And he had already earned it by remaining calm, patient, and focused under pressure. They reached a point where the terrain became steeper, the ground rough and rocky. The woman's bound legs made climbing difficult, but the cowboy helped her, offering his shoulder and guiding her movements carefully. Step by step, they ascended, keeping low and silent, each aware that one wrong sound could alert the men below. Finally, they reached a small ledge that overlooked the desert below. From here, they could see the men searching the area far beneath them, unaware of the escape happening just above. The cowboy gestured for her to stay low while he surveyed the path forward. "There's a trail down the other side," he whispered. "It leads to a small canyon where we can hide until it's safe." The woman nodded, placing her trust in him completely. Together, they began the careful descent, moving slowly over loose stones and gravel. The cowboy's experience on the range was invaluable here. He knew how to balance on uneven terrain, how to anticipate slips, and how to guide someone safely through treacherous ground. Halfway down, the woman stumbled slightly, and he caught her arm immediately. "Careful," he said. "We're almost there." She smiled faintly despite the situation. "I've been through worse," she said. "This is nothing compared to what I've survived." Her words reminded the cowboy why he had respected her from the beginning. She wasn't just brave, she was resilient, intelligent, and able to stay composed under pressure. Together, they were a team, each relying on the other in ways that were quiet but profound. As they neared the bottom of the ravine, a sudden movement caught the cowboy's eye. One of the men had climbed partway up, searching for any sign of escape. The cowboy froze, signaling the woman to do the same. The man paused, looking around, but then turned back, apparently deciding they had moved too far. "Now," the cowboy whispered, and they made the final dash to the cover of the canyon. The rocky walls provided perfect concealment, and they pressed themselves against the cool stone, breathing heavily but relieved. For the first time in hours, they felt a sense of safety, though they knew the danger was not entirely over. The woman looked at him, eyes wide with a mix of relief and admiration. "You didn't just save me," she said softly. "You helped me survive, and I couldn't have done this alone." The cowboy shook his head. "You helped yourself, I just made sure we had a path to safety." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Crickets chirped, a distant owl hooted, and the wind whispered through the canyon. For all its beauty, the desert was a harsh and unforgiving place, but tonight it had been a place of courage, teamwork, and unexpected trust. Though the immediate danger had passed, both knew the night was far from over. The men who had tied her up were still out there, and the cowboy had to plan their next move carefully. But for now, they had a moment to catch their breath, to assess their situation, and to prepare for what came next. And in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged in danger, courage, and respect. This was no longer just a rescue. It was the beginning of a story that would test their limits, reveal their strengths, and in the end, surprise everyone who thought they understood the desert, its dangers, and the people who survived there. The night air in the canyon was cool, almost refreshing after the heat of the desert day, but it carried a tension that was impossible to ignore. The cowboy and the Apache woman crouched behind a natural rock ledge, hidden in shadow, their eyes fixed on the desert floor below. The men who had tied her up earlier were still out there, pacing and searching, unaware that their intended victim was now safe, at least for the moment. The cowboy wiped a thin layer of dust from his face, trying to calm his racing heart. Hours of careful movement, stealth, and alertness had brought them this far, but he knew the real challenge was just beginning. The canyon offered temporary cover, yes, but they could not remain hidden forever. Eventually, they would need to move, and when they did, they might face the men again. He glanced at the woman. Even in the dim light, her face was steady, composed, her eyes alert and calculating. She had been through terrifying moments, yet she seemed almost fearless now. The cowboy admired that. "We can't stay here too long," he said quietly. "They'll realize something's wrong soon." The woman nodded. "I know, but we need a plan. We can't just run blindly. That's what they expect." Her words were sharp and practical, revealing a mind that had learned to survive through observation and intelligence. She was not just a passive victim. She was thinking strategically, analyzing the situation and preparing for action. That realization made the cowboy respect her even more. They would not just escape, they would outsmart these men. He surveyed the canyon floor, the rocks, and the ridges, mentally mapping a path that would take them safely away from the men while minimizing exposure. "There's a small wash over here," he said, pointing. "It will give us cover, but it's tricky. We'll need to move fast but carefully. Can you manage that?" She followed his gaze and nodded. "I can, just tell me where to step." The cowboy extended his hand to her, helping her adjust her footing as they prepared to descend deeper into the canyon. Every move had to be precise. Loose rocks could betray their position, and the men could still appear from unexpected directions. They moved in near silence, relying on subtle signals, eye contact, and instinct. As they navigated the uneven terrain, the cowboy explained his plan. Once we reach the bottom, we'll follow the wash to a bend that hides the trail. From there, we can either slip out toward the open desert or circle back toward the road. The goal is to get you far enough from these men so they can't find you again." She listened intently, nodding. "I understand, and I trust you." That simple statement, spoken in the darkness, carried more weight than words could express. Trust was rare in the world, and the cowboy felt its responsibility heavily. He could not fail her, not now, not after everything they had endured together. They reached the bottom of the canyon wash, a narrow stream bed filled with loose stones and small boulders. It was perfect for cover but treacherous to navigate in the dark. He led the way, stepping carefully, testing each rock with his weight before moving forward. The woman followed closely, mimicking his movements, her own awareness sharpening with every step. Halfway along the wash, a sudden noise made them freeze. A rock had shifted underfoot, sending a small cascade of pebbles tumbling down the slope. Their hearts pounded as they strained to hear any response. From below, they could see faint flickers of movement. One of the men had noticed something, but he did not yet recognize the source. The cowboy whispered, "Keep calm, don't move until I signal." The woman's breathing remained steady, a testament to her courage. She had endured terror and uncertainty, yet she remained composed when it mattered most. The cowboy admired her even more now. Her strength was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and unwavering. Minutes passed like hours. The man below finally gave up and moved back toward the others, muttering in frustration. The cowboy exhaled slowly, signaling for the woman to continue. Step by step they advanced, the canyon walls providing protection and a sense of safety, though only temporary. Finally, they reached the bend in the wash. From here, the trail would split, offering a choice. One path led toward open desert where visibility would be high but escape possible. The other curved back toward a hidden road where they could seek help or blend in with the few travelers still moving after sunset. The cowboy considered the options carefully. Open desert offered speed but no cover, and the men might anticipate their choice. The road offered concealment but required careful timing. He turned to the woman. "We take the road," he said. "It's safer and it puts us closer to help. We'll need to move quickly but cautiously." She nodded, her eyes sharp. "Lead the way." As they made their way along the hidden path, the cowboy noticed details others might overlook. A faint animal trail that could be used for faster movement, a cluster of bushes providing additional cover, and subtle dips in the terrain that would hide them from prying eyes. Each observation was vital. One mistake could reveal their location, undoing all their careful planning. The journey along the path was tense. Every shadow could hide danger, every rustle of leaves could be a sign of the men searching for them. Yet despite the fear, there was also a growing sense of determination between them. They were no longer simply fleeing. They were strategizing, working together, and proving that courage and intelligence could outmatch brute force. About halfway along the hidden path, they heard voices ahead, low, murmuring, cautious. The men were patrolling, likely searching the area where they had tied up the woman earlier. The cowboy froze, evaluating the situation. They could wait, risking detection if the men moved closer, or they could move silently and quickly, hoping to slip past unnoticed. He whispered, "We move now. Follow me closely." The woman nodded. Her movements were fluid and quiet, a reflection of both her experience surviving dangerous situations and her trust in him. Step by step, they crept forward, holding their breath with every shift of stone and brush. Suddenly, one of the men appeared ahead, stepping into a faint clearing lit by moonlight. The cowboy pressed the woman against a rock wall, signaling her to stay hidden. They held their position, hearts pounding, waiting for the man to pass. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one a test of patience and nerve. The man finally moved past, muttering in frustration, unaware of how close he had come to discovering them. The cowboy exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of relief wash over him. "That was close," he whispered. The woman smiled faintly, a brief moment of lightness in the darkness. "We've made it this far, that counts for something." They continued along the path, moving faster now as the immediate threat seemed to fade. Still, they remained alert, knowing the men could return at any time. Every sense was heightened, the sound of distant footsteps, the smell of the desert air, the shift of shadows across the canyon walls. Finally, the path opened to a small road used by travelers and local ranchers. From here, escape was possible. The cowboy guided the woman carefully onto the road, keeping to the shadows and signaling her to move quickly but quietly. The moonlight illuminated the terrain just enough for them to navigate without being seen from a distance. Once they reached a safe distance from the canyon, the cowboy allowed himself a brief moment to look at her. "We're almost there," he said. "Just a little further and we'll find help." She nodded, exhaustion visible in her eyes but overshadowed by determination. "I never thought I'd see the night like this," she said softly, "but I trusted you and it's paying off." The cowboy smiled faintly. "It's not just me. You've been brave every step of the way. Without your courage, we wouldn't have made it this far." Together, they continued down the road, their pace steady and careful. The danger had not disappeared entirely, but they were no longer on the men's turf. They were moving toward safety, toward allies, toward a chance to finally breathe and regain strength. By the time they reached a small cluster of lights in the distance, a ranch house still active despite the late hour, the cowboy knew the hardest part was behind them. The Apache woman would be safe, and the men who had tried to intimidate her would soon realize their failure. But even in that moment of hope, the cowboy knew that the night had tested both of them in ways that would leave a lasting impact. Trust, courage, intelligence, and quick thinking had been the tools that kept them alive. And now, they had proven that even in the darkest, most dangerous situations, ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges. As they approached the ranch, the woman glanced at him with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't just save me, you helped me stand tall when I thought I couldn't." The cowboy shook his head. "You saved yourself, I just helped guide the way." And with that, they stepped onto safe ground, ready for the final part of their story. A conclusion that would surprise everyone who had thought this night would end in fear and failure. The first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the desert sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The cowboy and the Apache woman reached the edge of the small ranch, where warm lights glowed faintly from a farmhouse. After hours of tension, danger, and careful maneuvering, they had made it to safety, or at least as safe as anyone could be in the wide, unpredictable desert. The cowboy slowed his pace, letting the woman catch her breath. She was exhausted, her legs still bruised and scraped from their journey, but there was a spark of relief in her eyes, a quiet triumph after the long night. She looked at him, and for the first time the weight of the ordeal seemed to settle on her shoulders. "You made it," he said softly. "You're safe now." She nodded, but her gaze shifted toward the horizon, thoughtful. "I am safe for now, but the men who did this, they won't give up easily." The cowboy understood her caution. The desert had a way of testing people long after the immediate danger passed. But he also knew that they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had turned a situation that could have ended in fear or violence into one of survival, strategy, and courage. He led her closer to the ranch, keeping to the shadows until they reached a side gate that provided access to the property without drawing attention. The farmer who lived here had long since gone to sleep, leaving the house quiet, but the light inside promised help, food, and safety. As they entered the yard, the woman paused, turning to him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "You didn't just help me escape. You gave me a chance to fight, to survive, and to be heard." The cowboy shook his head with a faint smile. "You were the one doing the real work. I just made sure you had a path to freedom." She smiled, but it was tinged with relief and admiration. Their journey together had created a bond neither of them expected, a bond forged through danger, trust, and quiet courage. Inside the farmhouse, they were met by a friendly, older rancher who immediately understood that something serious had occurred. The cowboy explained the situation quickly, keeping it factual but clear. The rancher listened carefully, nodding in understanding, and offered food, water, and a place for the woman to rest. As she sat down, drinking water slowly, her mind still processing the night's events, the cowboy took a moment to step outside. He wanted to make sure the desert was calm, that the men who had caused this chaos were not lurking nearby. The early morning was quiet, the desert waking slowly with birds chirping and a gentle breeze brushing across the land. From the small rise near the farmhouse, he could see tracks in the sand leading back toward the canyon. He followed them with his eyes, noting the patterns carefully. The men had searched, yes, but they had underestimated both the woman's intelligence and his own strategy. They would soon realize that their plan had failed completely, and the cowboy hoped that failure would teach them a lesson about underestimating others. Back inside, the woman leaned back, her body finally able to relax. She reflected on the night's events, the moments of tension, the careful steps through the desert, and the standoff with men who had believed they held power. But what she remembered most vividly was not fear. It was the sense of partnership, of trust, and of courage that had guided them both through impossible circumstances. "You know," she said softly to the cowboy as he returned inside, "I thought last night would be the end for me. But somehow it was. Somehow we managed to turn it around." He nodded. "Because we worked together, you didn't give up, and I made sure we had a plan. That's what made the difference." She studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "I've lived through many difficult things in my life," she said. "But this was different. You didn't just act, you thought. You didn't just protect, you guided. And that matters." The cowboy smiled faintly. "It matters more than most people realize. In situations like this, courage alone isn't enough. Strategy, awareness, and trust, those are what save lives." As the morning light grew brighter, they stepped outside to see the desert in full view. The vast expanse, once dangerous and threatening, now seemed calm, peaceful, almost inviting. The cowboy and the woman walked together along the edge of the ranch, feeling a sense of freedom that had seemed impossible just hours before. In the distance, the men who had caused this trouble were still there, searching and grumbling, unaware that their captive was long gone and that their plan had completely failed. The woman watched them from a safe distance, her heart steady. She no longer felt fear, only clarity. They had lost control and she had regained hers. "You see them?" the cowboy asked. She nodded. "I see them, and I know they won't try the same thing again, at least not to me, not after last night." He placed a hand on her shoulder, not in dominance but in solidarity. "Exactly. They underestimated you and they underestimated the situation, but now we've set things right. You're free to move forward." The woman's eyes softened, and she looked around at the desert, the ranch, and the cowboy who had guided her through the night. "I never expected this," she said quietly. "I thought I was powerless, but now I see I had power all along, and you helped me find it." They spent the morning talking, planning what would come next. The woman knew she could not return to the dangerous area immediately, but she could move safely with allies and support. The cowboy offered to accompany her part of the way, ensuring she reached a secure place, a community that could protect her and help her heal. As they prepared to leave the ranch, the woman turned to him once more. "I don't know what would have happened without you." "I truly don't," the cowboy shook his head. "It wasn't just me, it was you too. You had the courage, you had the focus. I just made sure we had a way forward, that's all." They stepped onto the road together, moving toward the sunrise, toward a new beginning. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it symbolized freedom, opportunity, and the strength they had discovered within themselves. Along the way, they met a few early travelers, friendly faces who offered guidance and reassurance. The woman felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in a long time, and the cowboy felt satisfaction in knowing that the danger of the night had passed without unnecessary violence. By midday, they reached a small settlement, a safe place with people who respected and valued her. The cowboy ensured she was fully protected and had what she needed before finally parting ways. There was no grand farewell, no promises beyond what was practical. But there was respect, gratitude, and an unspoken understanding that what they had shared would remain with them forever. The woman watched him leave, feeling a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt before. She had faced danger, navigated uncertainty, and emerged stronger. And she had realized something important. Strength was not just about surviving. It was about thinking clearly, acting wisely, and trusting the right people when the moment called for it. As the cowboy rode away, he glanced back at her, feeling the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing, even when the stakes were high. He had helped her not just survive, but regain her confidence, her independence, and her dignity. The Apache woman stood in the settlement, watching him disappear into the horizon, feeling a sense of closure and triumph. The desert that had once threatened her now represented freedom, strength, and resilience. She had survived, she had learned, and she had grown. By the evening, word of what had happened began to spread quietly through the community. People were surprised, not because of violence or fear, but because of the courage, intelligence, and teamwork that had turned a dangerous night into a story of hope and triumph. They marveled at the calmness and quick thinking that had made survival possible, and the story became one that inspired respect rather than fear. The woman knew that life would continue to bring challenges, as it always did, but she also knew that she now had the skills, the courage, and the confidence to face them. And she carried with her the quiet knowledge that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they acted wisely, stayed calm, and worked together. The desert settled into quiet again, but for the cowboy and the Apache woman, the memory of that night would remain forever. A story of courage, trust, intelligence, and unexpected triumph. They had survived not just by chance, but by the deliberate choices they had made, the respect they had shown each other, and the bravery they had demonstrated in the face of danger. And so the story ended, not with fear, not with defeat, but with hope, freedom, and the surprising ways that courage and wisdom could change lives in even the harshest places.